Good morning. It's great to have all of you here this morning. Uh, I just want to remind everybody that they may want to consult the final paragraph of the last chapter because it's one of the iconic passages in Lewis's literature, particularly in relationship to the Screwtape Letters. So the patient here is in with a group of people that are destructive to his faith, and he's been enamored by them. And so Wormwood and is rather giddy that they may be very successful in having permanently removed the patient from, or are removing the patient from his faith by gradually getting him involved in another group of people who would be very harmful to him. So a destructive peer group of sorts, a friend group that is sophisticated, well educated, shallow, those kinds of things. So Wormwood, as a young tempter, is enamored with the fact of trying to divert the patient away from God using a spectacular sin of some sort. And so Screwtape addresses this by saying this: you will say that these are very small sins, and doubtless, like all young tempters, you are anxious to be able to report spectacular wickedness. But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. Murder is no better than cards if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft, underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts, without anything that would interrupt his perception of the gradualness with which he is being diverted away from the faith. So now we come to chapter 13. And before we do that, I just want to read to you this particular verse, which I think is pivotal in understanding this particular chapter. This is from Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. Practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So this is from Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, a pivotal text, an important text, and one of those texts that I think ought to be representative in every household, whether it's on a poster or a picture or a plaque or a statue or whatever. This is one of those texts that I think that Christians really can rally their entire life around. So let's go to chapter 13. My dear Wormwood, it seems to me that you take a great many pages to tell a very simple story. The long and the short of it is that you have let the man slip through your fingers. The situation is very grave, and I really see no reason why I should try to shield you from the consequences of your inefficiency. A repentance and renewal of what the other side call, quote, grace, end quote, on the scale which you describe is a defeat of the first order. It amounts to a second conversion, and probably on a deeper level than the first. So here we have the patient. He's repented from his association with these people. He sees the danger and the wrongness of it, and so he repents in a way that takes him. He's wiser, and so it takes him to a deeper level in his faith than what he experienced before. So then Lewis begins to describe how, or not Lewis, but Screwtape begins to describe kind of what happened. As you ought to have known, the asphyxiating cloud which prevented your attacking the patient on his walk back from the old mill is a well-known phenomenon. So here the patient was out walking around in a very pleasant place near an old mill. It's the enemy's most, and so this experience at the old mill was apparently ecstatic. It was wonderful, and as he's walking back from the mill, Screwtape or Wormwood tries to attack him, but the presence of God is surrounding this patient in his repentance, in his conviction, and now he's far less immune to the attacks of the enemy because of this new repentance in his life. It is the enemy's most barbarous weapon, and generally appears when he is directly present to the patient under certain modes, not yet fully classified. Some humans are permanently surrounded by it and therefore inaccessible to us. And so Lewis is talking about those people in history and in life who have such a connection with God that they are almost immune to the temptations of Satan himself, that God's presence is around them so much and so powerfully that it's an asphyxiating cloud to Satan and to his minions, and they can't penetrate it. And so it seems to me that if we practice that text from Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, that would go a long way in helping to create that asphyxiating cloud and preventing the kind of temptation that is common to so many of us in the faith. And now for your blunders. On your own showing, you first of all allowed the patient to read a book he really enjoyed because he enjoyed it, and not in order to make clever remarks about it to his new friends. So, this is the beginning of the thesis here of what Lewis is getting at in this chapter, that this patient read a book, and he read a book in a way that he just enjoyed the pleasure of reading the book, the true pleasure, the goodness of it. And Wormwood said to Screwtape, you should not have let him do that. And he read the book not so that he could come up with clever things that he could say to his new friends, but just because it was a joy to read it. In the second place, you allowed him to walk down to the old mill and have tea there, a walk through country he really likes, and taken alone. So there were no distractions. It was a place that he loved to be at. It was nature. So that's why I think Psalm 19 is one of those helpful passages that remind us of the wonder of God's nature. So for example, historically, Christians have believed in two kinds of illumination or inspiration. And the first is, of course, the scriptures, right? So the biblical text, which we call special revelation. So there are two kinds of revelation. The biblical text is referred to as special revelation. Nature, in terms of how God reveals himself, that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1, for the very nature cries out of the glory of God. I think Romans 1:22. So even the heathen are without excuse. So in that text, we understand that God revealed himself in nature. And so there's natural revelation, special revelation, natural revelation. In this chapter here, Lewis is alluding to the fact that this man had this encounter with God through natural revelation. And if I don't know how many of you are nature lovers, but that is certainly true of me. And the whole of my life, so it's not a pantheistic thing. It's a matter of seeing the beauty of God through the natural order in terms of his truth, his law, and his nature. There's so much that you can learn about that. So this is what has happened here. So Wormwood goofed up by allowing the patient to experience God through natural revelation. And that's what Screwtape is saying here. So, in other words, You allowed him two real positive pleasures. Were you so ignorant as to not to see the danger of this? The characteristic of pains and pleasures is that they are unmistakably real, and therefore, as far as they go, give the man who feels them a touchstone of reality. Pain and pleasure are unmistakably real. True pain, true pleasure are experiences that carry with them a poignancy of realness, which implies that there's a lot of life that we have that is not as real. They are constructs, right? They aren't fully there. But he's saying pain and pleasure are unmistakably real. Kind of a very perceptive insight there. Thus, if you had been trying to damn your man by the romantic method, by making him a kind of child herald or worther, those romantic writers who, so if you know anything about theology, there was a guy named Schleiermacher, a German theologian who wrote his theology in a the romantic period method, and so the romantic period is obsessed with subjectivism. It's obsessed with the person, their experiences, their emotions. And so he's saying here, thus, if you had been trying to damn your man by the romantic method, by making him a kind of child herald or worther, submerged in self-pity for imaginary distresses, you would try to protect him at all costs from any real pain, because, of course, 5 minutes genuine toothaches would reveal the romantic sorrows for the nonsense they were and unmask your whole stratagem. So he's saying that that part of the temptation that comes to us in life is to get us to live subjectively, to live in our emotions, our perceived distresses. Look, this is exactly the world we live in, right? So truth has been exchanged for the lie of subjective reality, so that in our culture today, it's perfectly okay for a person to say that uh, for a person to say this is my reality, and my reality is more real than any of these other realities, and you have to respect the fact that my reality is more real than any of the other realities. And so we have um, and so we have um, uh, you know uh, over 300 million people in our country that are being taught exactly this. So you can see how this works itself out. So today I can wake up and feel like a man, but tomorrow I can wake up and feel like a woman. And what the reality is irrelevant. It's how you feel. And to disaffirm how a person feels about anything that is really real to them is to hate them. So that's the language. That's what we say today. That's why Lewis is so incredibly relevant, because I can't say that he saw exactly what I just said, but he intuitively sensed the danger of how the romantic era was beginning to process the whole thing called truth. So he's saying here, look, there are these people who live in this perceived emotional pain, and they think they're in terrible pain. But once they even have like something like a toothache, they understand that the emotional pain they think they were experiencing is nothing in comparison to the actual real pain of a toothache. And if they experience that real pain, and or if they experience real pleasure, those things are really real. The emotional, subjective reality that we are encouraged to embrace isn't real, or only partially real. So he says, but if you were trying to damn your patient by the world, that is, by palming off vanity, bustle, irony, and the expensive tedium as pleasures, how can you have failed to see that a real pleasure was the last thing you ought to have let him meet? So Screwtape is saying, look, there are these two things. There's a fake pleasure and there's a fake pain. And you have to get the patient to live in the fake pleasure they think they have and the fake pain. And he describes fake pleasure as vanity, like I'm really important, bustle, just being overly busy and running around and feeling important because, irony, that or cynicalness, that you're kind of like the person that sees things that other people don't see, and you're always questioning that, so you place yourself above everybody else and their perceptions. Or expensive tedium. So so we buy our pleasure through activity, through things that we purchase and things like that. So he's saying there are people who pursue those kinds of pleasures, and those are not real pleasures. And there are people who embrace a certain kind of subjective pain, but that's not real pain in comparison to a toothache. And the kind of subjective pleasures that he's talking about are not real pleasures in comparison to walking through nature down to the mill and actually experiencing the pleasure and the illumination and the inspiration of God as he reveals himself through the created order. That's what Lewis is saying here. Didn't you foresee that it would just kill by contrast all the trumpery which you have been so laboriously teaching him to value? Didn't you see that this real pleasure that he was experiencing would show all of the other pleasures, the vanity of having these really important, wealthy, sophisticated friends? Didn't you see that the true pleasure of experiencing God in the created order would make everything else he experienced that was not pleasure seem to disappear, to be unimportant? Did you see that? He's saying to Wormwood. And that the sort of pleasure which the book and the walk gave him was the most dangerous of all, that it would peel off from his sensibility the kind of crust you have been forming on it, and made him feel that he was coming home, recovering himself. And so Lewis describes these fake pleasures and these fake pains as a kind of crust, and that because the patient had this wonderful encounter with a really good book that he was reading and this wonderful walk that he took down to the mill, that it peeled away the crust, the excess of the falseness of what he believed to be originally pain and pleasure. So, as a preliminary, that it would peel off from his sensibility the kind of crust you have been forming on it, and make him feel that he was coming home and recovering himself. As a preliminary to detaching him from the enemy, you want to detach him from himself, and had made some progress in doing so. Now all that is undone. His encounter with the book and with the walk in nature put him back in touch with his true self. And pleasure did that. Real pleasure put him back in touch with his real self. Of course, I know that the enemy also, that is God, also wants to detach men from themselves. And so Wormwood here then begins to describe the work of God, the actual work of God in the life of the believer, the Christian. He describes it very well here. Of course, I know that the enemy also wants to detach men from themselves, but in a different way. Remember always that he really likes the little vermin and sets an absurd value on the distinctiveness of every one of them. When he talks about their losing themselves, he means only abandoning the clamor of self-will. Once they have done that, he really gives them back all their personality and boasts, I am afraid sincerely, that when they are wholly his, they will be more themselves than ever. Did you hear that? I mean, it's just so incredibly true. The the dichotomy there that seems to be a dichotomy is wonderfully and powerfully true. Let me read that again. When he talks about their losing their selves, he means only abandoning the clamor of self-will. And once they have done that, that is obedience, right, to God, he really gives them back all their personality and boasts, I'm afraid sincerely, that when they are wholly his, they will be more themselves than ever. And so Lewis is addressing this great truth. Lewis through Screwtape is addressing this great truth. You know, we think that if we are going to be fully who we are, that it means being very different from who God is. And nothing could be further from the truth. That when we embrace who we really are, it's because God has allowed us to see and helped us to become what we really are because he created us in the first place, right? So he restores us, he renews us into the essence of what we should have been in the first place. So it's beautifully said here. Hence, while he is delighted to see them sacrificing even their innocent wills to his, he hates to see them drifting away from their own nature for any other reason. And we should always encourage them to do so, to move away from their real nature. The deepest likings and impulses of any man are the raw material, the starting point with which the enemy has furnished him. To get him away from those is therefore always a point gained. Even in things indifferent, it is always desirable to substitute the standards of the world or convention or fashion for a human's own real likings and dislikings. so so and so what he's saying here is that our truest desires and our deepest dislikes tend to be more of what we really are, and that it's God's intent to restore and to redeem those in the best possible way. And it's his desire that we do that for ourselves. The deepest likings and impulses of any man are the raw material of who anybody is, he's saying. The starting point with which the enemy has furnished him. So calling, talent, um, uh, any of those kinds of things are really the core of who we are as people. And so he says, to get him, the patient, away from those is therefore always a point gained. To move us away from the essence of who we really are as created by God is always a good thing, he's saying to Screwtape. Even in things indifferent, it is always desirable to substitute the standards of the world or convention or fashion for a human's own real likings and dislikings. I myself carry this very far, says Screwtape. I would make it a rule to eradicate from my patient any strong personal taste which is not actually a sin, because you're moving a person away from who they really are. So he says, I myself would make it a rule to eradicate from my patient any strong personal taste which is actually not a sin, even if it's something quite trivial, such as a fondness for county cricket, or so county cricket would be like baseball, or collecting stamps, or drinking cocoa, even things that are seemingly neutral, that have no wrongness or rightness about them. He's saying, steer them away from that. Steer them away from that, because those things are linked to their inner core of who they really are. Such things, I grant you, have nothing of virtue in them, but there is a sort of innocence and humility and self forgetfulness about them which I distrust. So the move then is always to move the patient, to take the patient into something that is less real, and even more directly destructive. And so even those things which have no overt uh, virtue about them are still linked to something that is good. So move them away from that. The man who truly and disinterestedly enjoys any one thing in the world for its own sake, and without caring twopence what other people say about it, is by the very fact forearmed against some of our most subtlest modes of attack. So let me read that again. The man who truly and disinterestedly enjoys one thing in the world for its own sake, just because you can enjoy it, and without caring twopence what other people say about it. So Lewis is moving this argument and said, look, in the most shallowest of ways, if there's something that can be enjoyed in and of itself without it having any kind of destructive component to it, move that person away from it. So it's a scorched earth policy of the enemy to if something can't be contorted in a way that can be corrupted in such a manner that can cause our destruction, then move the patient away from it, because it still contains some good. You should always try to make the patient abandon the people or food or books he really likes in favor of the best people, the right food, the important books. So it's always good to move the patient away from those things that give him real pleasure and move him into those things that really the world says are good. I have known a human defended from strong temptations. I have known a human defended from strong temptations to social ambition by a still stronger taste for tripe and onions. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but he's just giving his own personal experience. It remains to consider how we can retrieve this disaster. The great thing is to prevent his doing anything. As long as he does not convert it into action, it does not matter how much he thinks about this new repentance. Let the little brute wallow in it. Let him, if he has any bent that way, write a book about it. That is often an excellent way of sterilizing the seeds which the enemy plants in a human soul. So don't let this new awareness of what he was doing with this couple, don't let this new awareness of how true pleasure and true pain took him into a place that is actually really real. Don't let him convert that into something meaningful, some kind of energy, some kind of into some kind of action that is redemptive and good, that really does change his life. No amount of pity in his imagination and affections will harm us if we can keep it out of his will. As one of the humans have said, active habits are strengthened by repetition, but passive ones are weakened. So active habits are strengthened by repetition, but passive ones are weakened. The more often he feels without acting, the less he will be the less he will be able to ever act. And in the long run, the less he will be able to feel. So let's just say that again. The more often he feels without acting. And again, this is in so much of our world today. I mean, you know, we're narcoleptic in terms of we're half asleep in terms of seeing things out there that we feel strongly about, but we do not act because we're half asleep. The more often he feels without acting, the less he will ever be able. The less he will. I'm sorry. The more often he feels about acting, the less he will be able to ever act. In the long run, the less he will be able to feel. So he's saying that the more we feel without acting actually turns around on itself and it hardens us, it calluses us to ever being able to really feel about the things that we should feel that are good, that are positive, that are necessary. So forgive me for coughing my way through this. I don't know why. It might be my allergies or whatever, but I appreciate your patience through that. And a great chapter, and I think one that we can all very much relate to, and one that speaks very, very clearly to the culture in which we live. So hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you share it. Thank you very much. Bye bye.